Wonderful. Why don't you fill us in a little bit then on your background? So we want to talk today, just to kind of set up the conversation where we're going to go. We talk about the state of British Christianity and really kind of what I would describe as the wokeification, to coin a term, of particularly the Church of England, but we might also look a little bit more broadly, because my context sits a little bit outside of that. I'm currently in the Church of Ireland, but I have a background in more sort of non-denominational Christianity. But give us a little bit of your background and how you guys, as sort of three Anglicans, without a major platform or some massive megachurch backing it, went on to have this podcast, where that came from and how you guys came to prominence.
Well, I mean, it depends how far back you really want me to go. But I mean, I suppose with the podcast, I knew Tom we were at theological college together, and in Cuddesdon in Oxford, and we were friends. And I think the sort of genesis of the podcast itself came from when the COVID lockdowns started happening. I'm sure you can remember how it was. Everyone was sort of reacting to what was going on. And I think Tom and I were pretty disturbed by various aspects of, the governmental response, but then the church response as well, which just seemed crazy really in lots of ways, particularly when the church, we've spoken about this a lot on the podcast, but, when the churches were shut down and when we were told, even priests couldn't go into the churches, right, and they could use them as food banks. They could go in to clean them and flush the toilets and things like that, but they couldn't go in them to pray, and we certainly couldn't have services, and you had the Archbishop of Canterbury celebrating Holy Communion in his kitchen and live streaming it, and this being kind of put forward as a, sort of a legitimate model of ministry and so on and so forth. Anyway, it was all pretty disturbing. And we didn't really feel like there was any kind of, authentic Christian or theological response to what was happening, and we felt like it was a really great opportunity that was not only being missed, it was being kind of spurned, So we decided to just try something out, and the first episode we called it The Fear of Death, and it was very different. It was very different to the way the podcast is now. It was much more cautious, it was just us. It was kind of like a sort of biblical exposition, really. We were talking about what the Bible says about death, what the Christian attitude is towards death, how we should how we should deal with the fear of death, as the title would suggest, and then how it related to the fear that people currently felt. And we did talk a bit about the way we felt that fear was being stoked up by the government and the media in perhaps ways that were inappropriate, but it was all very, very cautious. Anyway, it found an audience, a small audience at first, but we started getting shared on things like the Daily Skeptic website and things like that. Yeah. But then I had an interview with James Dellingpole. It was, I can't remember when. I think it was in April 2021. And that was that. It was at that point. It was really through Dellingpole's audience that the figures kind of went from being hundreds to thousands, and then that was kind of how we got sort of slightly more well known. Yeah. So that's kind of how it started, really, and it's kind of gone from there. Because I mean, and I can go into any of this stuff in any detail if you'd like me to, but essentially, I think that the COVID situation is kind of disclosive or indicative of something much, much deeper that's happening in the Church of England, but you might say more broadly in British culture and society, and it's kind of reflected in the church. But we talk not just about COVID, but about the other, let's say, departures from Orthodox Christianity that we see in the church, the kind of challenges that genuine Orthodox Christianity has to face in the culture, the sort of post-Christian, nihilistic, anti-human trends that you can see in so many different ways, so many different ostensible crises that we face in society, climate change or so-called pandemics, or the manifestation of that sort of anti-human post-Christian trend in abortion, euthanasia, transgenderism, transhumanism. I think in our conversations, we sort of see all these things as interlinked, as being part of this kind of post-Christian phenomenon.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's basically what the podcast is about. Lots of stuff there.
Very good. And I originally heard you through the James Dellingpole podcast. That was where I first heard of you guys. And thought that interview was excellent. I remember it. It must have been like straight after it came out. I was regularly listening to him at that point, and then got on to you guys. And you were, I would say, at least in my sort of looking around, you guys were really the only voice of note in UK Christianity that I saw. I mean, maybe there were others, but there weren't many who were kind of pushing back in that time period on a lot of this stuff. I think some people now have gradually started to wake up to it a little bit, but I think you were quite early on that. And so you really did hit a sort of need there, I think, within British Christianity. And it was interesting just how receptive, in spite of the fact that the leaders of the British church were so cautious to talk about these things, the audience was there. People wanted it. And I thought that was remarkable.
Yeah. I still find it very bizarre to hear you say such a thing. There wasn't really anyone else doing that. And I think it's probably true. I mean, maybe there were, and I just wasn't really aware of it. But there were people who were pushing back slightly against some of the things that the church was saying. Like I remember Marcus Walker, who's a priest at St Bartholomew's in London. He was sort of pushing back against it, but he wasn't sort of fundamentally challenging what was going on, which is what we were doing. We were saying we think what's going on is wrong, and we think it's destructive, and we think the church's response is not right either. So I think maybe we were the only ones saying that in public, but I think that there were a couple of other priests. I mean, people I know personally who were a little bit more outspoken. We may have been the only ones who had a podcast. It does seem crazy to me, and it seems sort of, Tom and I started it, and then Daniel came on board, quite early on when we met him through a mutual friend. But I suppose it seems crazy that two guys. Tom and I were curates at the time. I was ordained deacon. I hadn't even been ordained priest. It was just very, very beginning of my ordained ministry, and I suppose we were just the only ones who were willing to say these kind of things in public, and that's why we found the audience. But really, it should have in a sane world. I mean, Daniel wrote an article recently for the Conservative Woman where he imagined an alternative history in which the Archbishop of Canterbury had stood up and challenged the COVID measures and said, we're going to keep our churches open, and then eventually he's kind of imprisoned and became a sort of Nelson Mandela-like figure. Right. I mean, that sort of thing, that sort of feels like the kind of thing that should have happened.
Absolutely.
It shouldn't be like a couple of curates making a podcast. That's crazy. That's mad. And I think also it's not us. It's not because we did something, of exceptionally high quality. It's just because we were the ones who were saying it. That's the way I see it. So and there aren't. I believe in the providence of God. So I think God was involved in that decision. And I believe he's using the podcast in lots of different ways to reach people. And we get amazing feedback, amazing emails from people talking about how they've become Christians and, or they've come back to Christ, or just get this kind of thing all the time. The podcast has clearly been very meaningful for lots of people. So it's an amazing thing in that respect. I do see the providential hand of God in the whole thing, really.
Thank you so much for watching. Also, thank you so much for your response to my recent videos. Some of them have just gone really well. I've been so encouraged by it. So thank you for all who have liked and shared and watched. I really do appreciate it. If you want to help this video get out there to the right people, please do like, retweet, share it, whatever way you can, whatever platform you are on. You can support the channel as per usual through wearecontramundum.com. You can get some merch, or you can go to Patreon or PayPal and support us there. And finally, as always, if you are on YouTube, watch this next one.